The purpose of what I'm going to be doing today is to give a tour. And the tour is going to include quite a bit of information. Because I think as we all, as tour guides, are looking through our needs and our customers' needs, we're going to have to give relevant and consistent information. I think the days of tours that are 10 minutes and 15 minutes and they're very cursory are not going to exist anymore. Our tours need to last a solid 25 minutes, maybe 30, but they give good, meaningful information. What I'm going to be doing today is giving an informal tour. Different rooms, different guidelines. Each of us are going to use certain parts of the tour, or the entirety, or certain parts of the tour, but this is going to be information for our general tour program. The tours can begin in different areas. This is the foyer room, which I think everyone seems to prefer giving the tours in. And I think a lot of it is because there's photos, there's a lot of memorabilia here, and it's kind of easier to begin a tour. But I do want to caution everyone, hi Dominic, I do want to caution everyone that the problem with this area on a busy day, especially a Saturday and a Sunday, is that you're inundated with cross flow of people moving back and forth, and then you're trying to give a tour to 20 or 30 or more people, and you have to make sure that they are going to hear you clearly. So, even though this is a good place for a tour, I think we have to pick our battles. In many ways, the Vintage Room is an excellent location. What is our problem again? It's where we begin our tours. Because if the Vintage Room is taken for groups, then it is difficult to begin a tour in there. But in many ways, if it's not taken, sometimes it's better to give a group tour in there to begin, especially on weekends. When we are here in the foyer or when we begin our tour, we definitely need to welcome ourselves. Say who you are and where you're from or how long you've been with the company or whatever that's meaningful. But the first bonding is making sure that people know who you are. The second thing is that your tours, as your personality, needs to have a passion, an interest in what you're doing because it shows. When you give a tour, it's going to show and reflect of what you feel about the company and how people perceive that. Very, very important issue. I think in giving the tours, the most commonly asked questions would be, after you welcome them, of course, is, who's the family? Who owns the company? Why are we here? Why is there a winery in Los Angeles? Very commonly asked question. The question of, how did the name come about? San Antonio. These are common questions that I think need to be the part of the very first part of the tour in everything that we do. The part about why are we here, or let's talk about the family. I think it's important, if we are here in the foyer room to show photos, that the family is in 4 generations. I think people need to understand that this is a family-owned business, not a corporate entity in a way, but a family-owned business that is now in 4 generations. That's number one. When we talk about who the generations are, I think we can allude to first generation, the great uncles that started the winery here in 1917 on this land. Okay, we have been on this land since 1917. Second generation, father Stefano, Maddalena, okay, my mother and father. And father came in 1937 from Italy to help the remaining uncle. And that remaining uncle was Santo Cambianica. So in 1937, Dad came when he was 16 years old to help his uncle, because uncle had no one to help him. So he reached out for any of the nephews in Italy to come to help, and my dad was the one that said, I'd love the opportunity in America, and they worked very, very well together. Mother, Maddalena, came from northern Italy in 1929. They farmed in the San Fernando Valley at a time when the valley was predominantly agriculture. And father met mother when they were farming in Chino, my mother's family, married, and they've been working together literally since the week after they were married. She came to the winery here, side by side as partners, and worked together ever since. And it's a very good team, an excellent team. We always say that the team was that this man worked without fatigue because he loved to work, and he loved the winery, making wine. He loved to work in the winery. Mother did everything else. She took care of us. She took care of accounting, bookkeeping, the thinking of ideas, and so many of those ideas have come into fruition today. A great thinker. And what's amazing is that, you know, a woman in business then, in the mid-40s, is pretty rare. Okay, and yet, what they've accomplished as a team is really phenomenal. So, second generation, third generation, my brother, myself, my sister, and fourth generation, we each have children that are part of the company. So we're very fortunate. It's 4 generations in a family business in America, which is really quite rare in America today. A little bit about the family. The other part that's kind of interesting when people say, well, either how did you get in the wine business, or furthermore, why did you choose this location? Well, the second part is kind of easy. We forget that if one looked back to the early 1900s and before, prior to that, if one looked back to what Los Angeles was as a city, Los Angeles was a very small city. But all around it was agriculture, just like most cities of the United States at one time. If one looked back, when we started here in 1917, there were over 100 wineries in the city of Los Angeles. There were wineries in the county. There were wineries 40 miles to the east, San Bernardino County, Riverside County. There were at least 100 plus out there, wineries. Why? Because it was a good business. It was a business that dealt with agriculture, and all around the cities there was plenty of fruit, like grapes or olives, or plenty of fruit to supply wineries or agricultural entities that needed fruit surrounding them. So it was not uncommon. Today, sure, it's common. It's not common. Why are we here? I mean, but if you look back in time, we were one of many. So when one looked at opportunities, they said, well, the opportunity to own a winery, to have a winery, is not a bad opportunity. So, very, very common then at that time. My great uncles, when they started the winery, they really didn't, they really never made wine in Italy. Okay? They didn't. It wasn't their business. They were stonemasons. And what they did when they came here in 1912 in this area, called Lincoln Heights, they worked for the railroads which surrounded the winery at that time, still do today. But it's interesting because this Lamar Street was the main entrance for all the employees of the main railroad yard, which is at the very end of this location here. And this railroad yard probably employed at that time a good 12,000, 13,000 men. No women, but men. And men of many ethnic groups. Okay, many Europeans. At that time we had a huge European population here. And many of Latin descent, Hispanic descent. Okay. It was my uncle's ideas to begin their little winery here, and then as these European or Hispanic men would go home and buy their wine for the week, and that's how they started their little facility. That was America, the land of opportunity. The name of the company, San Antonio. All right. In the Catholic faith, there is a saint which is the Catholic faith believes very strongly in, and that is St. Anthony. St. Anthony of Padua. San Antonio of Padua. So, since we are from the north of Italy, in that region, Venetian, Lombard region, the patron saint of Padua is St. Anthony. It was my great uncles that named it, in their faith, the winery of St. Anthony. To a European or a Latin-speaking person, San Antonio Winery. So it doesn't have anything to do with Texas, except San Antonio, Texas was named after St. Anthony of Padua. Same thing, but many, many generations before. So we've spoken a little bit about the family, the history, a little bit about why there's a winery here, a little bit about the name, and that I think kind of sets the tone because it gives people the information about who we are. Very, very important. Okay? We went over some of the photos here just briefly that we spoke about, and so with that, let's go in the next room, okay? I think each of us have to kind of size up the tours that we're giving because, you know, depending on the interest level, you're going to glean different information to use. There may be more technical information we'll talk about, more historical, but the basic premise, which I just spoke about now, has to be conveyed at the very beginning. The other thing that I think people find interesting is kind of like a historical aspect of winemaking in this area and then how we evolved as a company in this winemaking community. What people don't realize is that the center of winemaking in California did not begin in Napa Valley or Sonoma or areas like that. It began here in downtown Los Angeles. It began about 1767, 1770, 1780. With the advent of the missionaries, the Franciscan missionaries and padres coming from Mexico, which at that time was controlled by the Spanish kingdom, the Franciscans came here and developed their missions. And along their missions, they developed orchards, and whether it be fruit or olives or vineyards. And that was the beginning of commercial grape growing and winemaking in California. The father of winemaking was Jean-Louis Vignes, V-I-G-N-E-S. Why? Because with the migration from Mexico, there were quite a few in the French community that followed and migrated here to Southern California. So the center of winemaking as we know it today, after 200, 300 plus years, was centered about a quarter of a mile from here, near where the Union Station is, and actually where the Central Post Office Union Station is, and it's still called Vignes Street. And that's where Jean-Louis Vignes had the very first winery and grape growing facility in the state of California. So, moving on to maybe the 1880s, the French had a tremendous amount of influence here in winemaking, especially in Southern California, because in Los Angeles here, near what we call the Chinatown today, Union Station area, this Lincoln Heights, there are quite a few French colonists that came from France and from Mexico. They were really the first, not only as commercial winemakers, but the first to really build the American or the California wine business as we know it today, about 1880. Right following them, or at the same time, you had the huge Italian immigration. So the Italian community started here about 1880. In Northern California, they started with the gold rush, okay, 1849, 1850s. But in Southern California, they came in about 1880s. And when you look at the communities today, which kind of brings up the answer, why are we here as people? We, the Rebeli family, as family. Why are we here in Lincoln Heights? Or not just that we started the winery for opportunity. Chinatown as we know it today, the Union Station area, which did not exist in the early 1900s, Lincoln Heights here was the center of the Italian community. So our people came here because they had their own people here from their villages in Italy. And so our people, our uncles, settled here anyway to find work, let alone thinking they would have a winery. But historically, this was a huge grape-growing community, which most people don't realize now what a large community that it really was. Okay. In 1917, when we started, as I mentioned, there were about 100 wineries. We just had the uncles working, very, very simple operation. But there was a time in 1921 became what we call Prohibition. And that lasted to 1933. The Prohibition didn't prohibit you from making wine. If you had a license, if you were a legally bonded winery, licensed brewery, distillery, you could make spirits and wines and beers. The problem is, with the Volstead Act, the Act of the Prohibition, you really couldn't sell it. Okay? But there were ways that wines could be sold. And we were very fortunate because we were ones that were nominated to make wines for Christian rites for communion. Could have been Catholic or Lutheran or Episcopalian, but we made wines for communion. And that's how we survived for 13 years. And two other ways that were very interesting, which were legal, as long as you had a permit, you could sell a certain amount of grape juice to families. A family could come here at harvest season and buy 160 gallons, 3 barrels of juice. And they had their permit, they can go home and make it for family use. The other way that's very interesting is that drugstores were allowed to sell wine. And with a prescription, you can go in and get this product. The products were called tonic wines. And what they were sweet wines with a little brandy added, like good port, and then they would add, vitamin D, vitamin E, iron. It was kind of like this elixir of stuff. And one of our brands was called Elixir, by the way, but it was a tonic wine that a drugstore could feature. But one would have to have then the permit or the prescription to buy it. So there were a lot of ways during Prohibition. We were small. We didn't lose a lot. We had very little to lose, come to think about it. But that is how we survived during Prohibition. In the 30s, I mentioned my dad came from Italy to help out. And then it was just one uncle remaining, Santo. And again, very small operation. And what we really find interesting is that when we look at wines today and go to a supermarket shelf and look at Cabernet Sauvignons and Chardonnays and Merlots and all these kind of types of wines, so little of that existed in the 1930s and the 40s. What existed was the wine that most people bought, and was not Cabernet Sauvignon. Very few making those wines. In fact, what people bought were wines in gallons. And they used to call it Burgundy because, typical of Burgundy, Chablis, Rosé. They used to buy wine in gallons economically that people could buy and enjoy and take it home. Most of our customers that enjoyed wine was not, and I don't want to say the typical American community, because the American community was really hard liquor driven from Prohibition and, say, beer. The European Hispanic community was wine driven. They were used to drinking wine with their food versus other cultures. And their support is what allowed us to survive for many, many years. So to think that up to 1959, most wines that were made in California were wines that we would call volume wines in gallons, and $2 a gallon, well made. Taxes in those days were a nickel a gallon. I mean, it was like no problem. Everybody made a little money on that. But that was what people were used to. In 1959 on, things began to change, and the change then was for the trend was going more for dry wines. And in the 60s, this sense of varietal, this sense of making or planting grapes that were specific varieties, mainly of European origin, like Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon and things like this. And then the trend was to produce wine from that variety and bottle it under that variety. Prior to that, we had the field blends. Everything was blended into a common gallon or a common tank. That's what was accepted. So for our little winery, we realized, Prohibition, going through the 40s and the 50s with good volume wine. And in the 60s, we began realizing this change of varietal wines. And just as a bit of interest, if you took a look at Chardonnay today, which is such a commonplace variety, it's the largest grape variety grown in California. Wente Brothers introduced the first Chardonnay in California, and they only introduced it in the late 60s. You think about that. Merlot, commonplace today. That was only introduced in the early 70s by Louis Martini. So these things were in common, but they were going back to European tradition, and this is what was occurring here. So we began dabbling with different varieties and started a small, we call it varietal program of specific grape varieties bottled under their variety. We began experimenting with fruit from different parts of California, but especially the coast of California, Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo and Monterey County. And when it was all said and done, we really kind of fell in love with the white grapes that were grown in Monterey and the red grapes for us that were grown in Paso Robles. So our venture into varietal wines was really beginning in the mid to late 60s. And we experimented in those areas, and those are our key growing areas today for the San Antonio Winery. So if one looks at what is San Antonio Winery today, San Antonio Winery today still produces the wines we started with. We still produce altar wines. And we are the foremost supplier of altar wines to Christian rites churches in the United States. San Antonio produces still wine in certain volumes and good dessert wines. Okay. Most of these come from our vineyards in the center of California, around Fresno. Why? A little warmer, a little more production per acre, helps to make more economically priced wines. San Antonio today is a series of very finely crafted varietal wines to kind of fit all taste profiles and different price ranges. Our brands are Madalena, named after my mother, Madalena, San Simeon, Opaque, Windstream, Riboli Family, Napa Valley. And what do these represent? They represent different vineyard sites throughout the coast of California and different winemaking styles. So all those styles fit in to our vineyards on the coast. Today, we farm about 525 acres in Monterey, and since this is a cool area, it's mainly grapes that love that kind of climate. White grapes, Chardonnay, Riesling, Pinot Gris, Gewürztraminer, things like this. And it loves Pinot Noir. The red grapes that we've kind of fallen in love as far as a region is Paso Robles. And we grow there the family of red grapes, like the family of Bordeaux, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, Malbec, the family. We grow the family of Syrah, which is Petit Syrah, Syrah, Grenache, grape called Mourvedre. So we make wine from those individual varieties, and then we also make these wonderful blends within their own family of these particular, what we call the heritage blends. So San Antonio Winery today makes wine from many different areas, different styles, different levels, but our varietal vineyards are mainly located on the coast of California. As a company, we kind of pride ourselves in that we offer, well, let's hold that a minute. We'll just continue there. So we're going to move forward now just a little bit. Okay, we're in the vintage room now, and I think what's very symbolic about this particular room is that this is where we started. This is where we had our nucleus, you might say. It's right here. This is what my great-uncles built in 1917, and today we call it the vintage room. I mentioned earlier about the history of winemaking, how we transitioned into many things over time. The wineries that were here slowly left Los Angeles. In 1964, we became the last winery left in the city of Los Angeles. Okay? Are we the last winery today? No. because now there are 6 legally bonded wineries, Malibu, Bel Air. I think there's one just starting now by the Wrigley family, Santa Catalina Island, planting grapes. So we are now the oldest winery. So there are, funny, it's interesting, there are wineries coming back a little, but there's no land. So what happened to all these wineries from when we started in 1917 and 1964? The wine business was not a bad business. It was a good business. People did drink wine. What happened as the city grew? That agricultural demand, or that demand for more land for housing and industry, whatever, took precedence. Most wineries sold the little plots of land they owned. An acre downtown, 5 acres downtown, whatever it may be. And that's really what occurred in the Los Angeles setting. Not that wineries were forced out. Wineries chose, most of them, to sell their land. In 1964, we made the decision not to sell, but to really strengthen what we have here. So a little bit of information about why we're still here, but really what happened to the wine business. And you could see it everywhere. A city grows, a city needs land, I don't care where it is, and the first thing to be incorporated is agricultural land around a city. And that's what occurred here. But this is called the Vintage Room. We host different events in here, and it's very symbolic, because this is where the birth of our company was, in this particular room right here. Okay? I think this is always a nice tour, a nice spot to have tours. It's the beginning of the winery here, inside here, and it's nice is to point out to the guests that are here that the winery is an evolution of time. This building was built in 1923. There were others built in the 20s or 30s and the 40s, and on and on and on. And what's really interesting to explain to the guests is that of the lands we own, which is 20 acres here, this winery sits on the remnants of families' homes. These were mainly the homes of Italian families. And as the city grew, or the families, as every immigrant group, they made a little money and they moved on to better areas. When there was this exodus of Italians over the 20 or 30 years, we would try to buy up the small homes, and this is how gave us the opportunity of the winery of San Antonio to grow. So everything here historically were individual homes of families. Okay. When I say this is the legally bonded winery, that's what it is. So we do make wine here. We are a full-fledged operating facility. So I'll tell you a little bit about kind of what we do. The winery here has about 150 stainless steel tanks. There's about 900,000 gallons of stainless steel tanks, as we see here, at this facility. There's about 3,500 barrels made of oak, whether it's European or American oak, but it's oak for aging wine. It's all at this facility. All the bottling is done here. All the shipping is done from here. All that's done here at this. So this is an active bonded winery of the federal government. Okay? What's really interesting in this room when we talk about technology, we look at stainless steel tank and we kind of think the same thing. We think, well, these have always been here. The industry has always used stainless steel. Well, that's not true. Stainless steel is relatively new technology. 30 years, 35 years, something like that. Before that, if you look at these, which are the last of the redwood tanks, if one would have gone back and toured wineries 35, 40 years ago, you would have seen mainly that the wineries had tanks made out of redwood. There was a time when redwood was plentiful, and we were allowed to cut it. And now we don't, which I'm glad we don't, but all this winery here was full of 150 redwood casks. And that's how wines were stored or aged or fermented, meaning the juice converted to wine. Stainless steel became important for 2 reasons. One, for sanitation, cleanliness. These were hard to sanitize. Those are easy to sanitize. which is boiling hot water, no chemicals, nothing, just hot, hot 200-degree water. Sanitation is what helped make better wine today. That's one of the things, sanitation. The other thing that's very important, when you look at the stainless steel tanks and you look at these almost dimpled radiators, this is where a coolant goes through. Kind of much like a car's radiator, but glycol, which is chilled by large central units, very cold, passes through all these tanks. Every tank has its own thermostat, its own adjust it. Why? What makes better wine today is many things. But sanitation for one, and temperature control is another. And typically speaking, when we make wine now, juice, we bring in juice from our vineyards, we add yeast, different strains of yeast, and the purpose of the yeast is to convert the sugar of the wine, sugar of the juice, into the alcohol of wine. And with that, all the flavors, and you capture the nuances of what that grape has. Why temperature control? Because what the yeast wants to do is to ferment. It wants to convert that sugar fast, okay? Very fast. Gives off a lot of energy, a lot of heat. Okay? What we want the yeast to do is to slow down. Okay? There's only one way to do that. You keep the temperature cool that's in the tanks. In the old days, these tanks, the juice would go in here. We'd add our yeast, same principle. The difference is that these would ferment unchecked at any ambient temperature at any moment of time. Okay? So if the temperature that day was 60 degrees, the juice would ferment at 60. If it spiked tomorrow at 80, it would ferment at 80. Back and forth, back and forth. And you made wine that was acceptable, but I think not to the standards of today. So the beauty of stainless steel is that we are controlling the yeast, it's all controlling the yeast to ferment at the temperature we wish it to. If we want a longer, slower temperature, we chill down the juice in the tank. We stand back, just set it, keeps that temperature for months later. We want it a little bit faster, we warm it up a little. In here there was no control, in here there's control. So, number one. So, when we look at today about what makes really good wine, what makes great wine, what makes good wine in general? Well, first of all is good equipment to help convert the grape to wine, and tanks and barrels and the right equipment. Okay? Good winemakers, very important. They're the chefs. They're the ones that are going to tweak every little nuance of the year, of the harvest, and they're the ones that are going to babysit wines through their lifetime to make sure they're right for you when they get there to you, the customer. One of the most important elements, though, which makes the difference between very good wine and wines where you say, wow, is that interesting? Or is that really interesting? Are the grapes, the areas they're grown in, how they're grown, and all the things that goes along with the planting of vines. And we're going to talk about that just a little bit. So technology, every winery today needs good technology, and all you have to do is have the money to buy it. But without it, you can never convert grapes into wine carefully. Good winemakers, most important. We'll talk about grapes just a moment, though. In the world of wine, if we look back for centuries and centuries, and we look back at areas in Europe where they've been making wine since the time of the Romans, their laws are very strict. They are, in areas of France and Spain, they control, for example, govern what kind of grapes could be grown in an area, and for the most part, that's it. They're going to control, they're going to give you a permit when you want to remove vines and replant them. You have to apply for a permit to do that. So they make sure that everything is controlled. They control the water usage. A lot of areas, you can't even add water to the vines. There's enough in the soil. But what's really interesting here is that we don't have those kind of laws yet. But what governs us is that we try to now mimic a lot of the grape growing from Europe here, which means we look at grape varieties and we say, we know that typically certain grape varieties like certain types of soil. And we try to find those kind of soils. Well drained, doesn't retain water. Merlot, for example, doesn't mind clay, which retains water, loves clay. Depends on the varieties. Okay? We also try to mimic climate. What makes the difference in flavors from one variety, one winery Chardonnay to the other, besides technology and winemaking, is the soil and the climate where they grew that particular grape. So for us, we like our styles from Monterey for white, or our styles of red grapes from Paso Robles. We like the styles that come from there. We're used to it. When we grow grapes today, currently we're planting beautiful vineyards in Paso Robles. When we grow grapes today, we have analyzed almost every square foot of that land to understand the soils in that land. Why? There's two parts of planting now. The root and what you put on the root. What does that mean? In the world of rootstock, a root is the life. It's what gives vigor, but it's neutral. It grows. What you graft onto it, attach to it, then will become the fruit. Rootstocks are things that are adapted to different soils. So we choose specific rootstocks for different soils. And depending on what kind of grape we want to use on that rootstock, we then choose rootstocks that might be, for example, if we have fertile soil, we're going to choose a rootstock that is less vigorous. So whatever we put on it it's going to hold back a lot of this fruit production. No one wants high fruit production. Those days are gone. They want generally less balanced fruit volume because that's where you get that intensity. That's where you're going to get that wow factor over time. Good, better, wow. Grapes, climate, rootstocks, how you grow things. So rootstocks are very important. So a winemaker has maybe 40 different rootstocks to consider. Interesting choice. These are all calculated risks. Clones. When we plant now, and someone may think, well, we want to plant Cabernet Sauvignon. And you say, okay, you go buy a twig from somebody, it's Cabernet Sauvignon. There's probably 40 different varieties of Cabernet Sauvignon. There's X amount of the same of Pinot Noir in every variety. And we go to specific nurseries to purchase these specific clones to graft onto the rootstocks to plant in our vineyards eventually. A winemaker has all these choices now in the grape. So winemaking, technology, planting, all important, but the grape growing is really almost one of the most important elements for those differences in quality. The interesting in that interest factor. So in our vineyards today, we're very calculating, even to the point as far as technology goes. And again, I think when we're giving our tour, these are bits of information that should be used accordingly, depending on the group's interest. Okay, so for example, in our vineyards today, we plant grapes that are high density. Example, there was a time in California when we took an acre of land and we might plant 600 vines on it. And we wanted each of those vines to produce a tremendous amount of fruit. They were like trees. Today, in our new vineyards, we plant 1,500 acres per vine. In Europe, in Bordeaux, commonplace to plant over 2,000 vines per acre. Why? The more vines, the less fruit produced per vine. The healthier each vine is. And the less fruit that is produced on each particular vine is much more intense because there's just less of it. So you took a vine at 5, and again, rootstock, all that has a lot to do, but you took a vine at 500 vines per acre, it would produce, I'm just going to say 20 pounds of fruit. You take the same vines today at 1,500 vines per acre, they're going to produce 6 pounds of fruit per acre. The vines are healthier, they last longer, the fruit is much more intense. So all this evolution of grape growing is so important today, and I can't stress that enough, about how grapes should be grown, how they should be grown, and so forth. So, a little bit about grape growing. We're going to speak a little bit in a moment about fermentation, winemaking, very basically. Then we're going to speak about barrel aging a little bit. One of the things I mentioned as we first started is the different locations where your different tour information should be. And you know, one of our problems here is that we have so many group activities that somehow we have to improvise. And you may have to start your tour in different areas. And this is what we're going to go over. But it should always be in areas where your guests can hear you and there's less obtrusive noise. Okay? One of the things I want to recommend too is that some of us have stronger voices than others. If the groups are large, 50 in a group, sometimes you're better off having 2 people or split that group in with 2 tour guides. So each one takes a smaller group and they could hear you better and a lot more intimate. So I just want to make that statement very clear in groups. The other thing about groups that I find is something that we don't do. You have to stay with a group. You cannot, it's not a good policy to run ahead of a group. Simply, you have to kind of guide them, go into different rooms, and if you're through with a room, like the very end, then you guide them back, but you never allow the guest to go on their own back. That's not courtesy, and it's not safe, because they are in a working environment. You are the guide. At the end of the tour, you're going to make the statement, thank you, and whatever we're going to say, which we'll talk about later, but I'd like you to follow me now, because now we'll bring you back in the taste room. You must guide people back, because one of the points of safety is that you never want guests to stay in the winery just for safety reasons. It's a huge responsibility to bring people out of the winery, the ones that you brought in. I want to talk a little bit about winemaking, and we'll do this in a one-on-one fashion, but what are the elements of winemaking that might be interesting for people? I think, first of all, you have the fermentation in stainless steel. And really, what is the word fermentation? It didn't matter if it was 3,000 years ago or today. It's yeast, whether it's natural on the grape or that we add a cultured yeast to convert sugar to alcohol. Grape to wine, flavors of the grape to wine. This is time-honored, time-honored. And it was only Louis Pasteur that understood at that time the role of the yeast on the fermentation and the beginning of adding cultured yeast, which are pure yeast strains, to make better wine. Wild yeasts have a tendency to ferment at their own whim and do what they want to do, and they're a little uncontrollable. Cultured yeast are the kinds that are more controllable. We spoke a little bit about slowing down of the yeast or intensifying it with temperature. Dry wines versus sweet wines, colors of wines. If you took a grape and we made it into wine, we say, why do we do that? Some grapes should be made into a style of wine by tradition. Okay. For example, dry wines. Okay. A dry wine means wine that have an absence of sugar. Where does the sugar go that was in the grape? The yeast ferments it to more alcohol. So in the process of fermentation, if we took a grape, we decide, what do we want to make from it? Do we go traditional? Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, things like that, and alcohol, meaning 13.5 to 14% alcohol? Do we make it less alcohol? Do we allow a certain amount of sweetness to remain in the wine, or do we not? A lot of that is a function of a traditional style or what a winemaker or a winery thinks their customer likes. So general rules of thought. Typically, the richer, more prestigious wines, whether they're red or white, need more alcohol. Okay. They need that 13.5 to 14.5, maybe a little more alcohol. Why? It gives body. It gives feel. If you were to take a Cabernet Sauvignon and tasted it at 12% versus 14.5, you'll notice a big difference. Just in the mouthfeel that the alcohol, the glycerol of the alcohol provides. So, more alcohol for dry wines. Typically, less alcohol for sweeter wines. Because what happens in sweet wine production so in dry wine production, we allow the yeast to ferment all the sugar of the grape till there's none left. That's kind of easy in a way. When you make wines a little sweeter, a Riesling, a Moscato, things like that, you're trying to capture some of the natural sweetness of the grape. Why? It's a style, and it's light, it's refreshing. With that sweetness, you're going to create a little less alcohol. Why? Because what you're doing now, you're monitoring the sugar level every day. The yeast is working on the sugar, and the sugar level is decreasing, and it's going to alcohol. At some point, we stop the fermentation so that now, instead of 14.5 richness of alcohol, we want 10. We want the wine more delicate, lighter, more refreshing. But with that comes that little bit of natural sugar. Why? We cannot add sugar to wine. The sugar is from the fruit, is from the natural sugar in the grape. And that's the first thing to mention to all your guests, that the natural sugar that comes from wine, at least in California, comes from the sugar of the fruit. We make a brand called Stella Rosa in Italy, which is owned by San Antonio Winery. That's 5.5% alcohol, with a really elegant, with a really just a natural sweetness. That's even going down one notch here in making that kind of wine. Again, it's controlling fermentation. So if a winery wanted to, if they took a Chardonnay, and that's what they wanted to start with, they can make it a rich wine at 14.5. They can make it a 5% alcohol wine, if that's what they wanted. They can make it absence of sugar, or they can give it all the natural sugar they want. By the way, they can control the fermentation. How do you control the fermentation? It's easy. You get the temperature so cold that the yeast becomes dormant. It trickles. You set the temperature in those new tanks, stainless steel tanks, lower the temperature, and you are going to have this just trickling, or call it static dormant effect. Then it's up to the winery to filter out that sleeping yeast to render the wine natural sweetness. Because if you don't, and there's still yeast in there, it could start re-fermenting on you. So, in fermentation, dry wine, a little sweeter. More alcohol, less alcohol. To think, just by controlling the method of fermentation, almost controlling temperature in a way. Color. Color is very interesting in wine because every grape has its own pigments in the skins. And some grapes have more pigments than others. The unfortunate thing for a lot of guests or a lot of consumers is that they think that a red wine is better for you because darker in color, and a white wine is not as good for you because it's lighter. Well, you know what? It's all natural product, and it really depends on your makeup, what is best for you. A lot of consumers think that the darker the red wine has more body than red wine that is more garnet. Well, that's not really true. Just that some grapes have more pigments than others. So to give you an example, when we ferment, if we wanted to make red wine from red grapes, we take red grapes and the juice and the seed and the skin all remain in contact with each other. All of them. As the fermentation begins, and the sugar is being created to alcohol, converted. The alcohol now begins to extract the pigments that are in the skin and the tannin, the natural acid called tannin that's in the seed. Tannin is what tea is. For those that love tea, tannin is the more you leave tea in hot water, the more drying, tannic the tea becomes. And the more tannic the wine becomes. Okay? So each grape is so different. Cabernet Sauvignon can have a deep color, more pigments in the skin. Pinot Noir has much less pigments in the skin, but it still has body. It's just perceivably less color. Tannin. Cabernet Sauvignon has strong tannin. Pinot Noir has soft tannins. It's the nature of the grapes, where they're from. Okay. So when we make red wine, we want to make sure that we crush the grape, we separate the stem, and machines do that automatically. The stem is what you do not want. It is bitter, and if you've ever purchased table grapes out there and bitten into grape stems, you'll see what I mean. It's bitter wood. That's not good for winemaking. That's always eliminated from winemaking. What we want for red wine production is the seed, the skin, and the juice to ferment together as alcohol is being created and all that, all the extractions of flavors, tannins from the seed, and so forth. When we want to make white wine, we do not use the seed in the skin. Okay? White wines we want to make more delicate. So we take the white grapes and we put them in machines called presses. And they press very gently the grape, split it, and the juice flows. We take the juice. And the seed and the skin are discarded, or they're used for fertilizer in the vineyards or mulch, cattle feed even, very rich. We want just the white juice, and we ferment the white juice by itself to make white wine. So when you think about this, when you want to make white wine, you can make it out of any grape color. Doesn't matter. Some of the best rosés in the world and white wines in the world can be made out of Pinot Noir. You can take any red grape, any red grape, and press it and take the juice. The juice is white. The juice for grapes to be used for varietal winemaking, are all white juice. It's the pigments in the skin that give the color. Therefore, white wine can be made out of Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, anything that you wish. You know, the best champagnes in the world are Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. They take the white juice. Okay? So the trick is, quickly you take the white juice with no seed and skin contact. And you take that white juice and you ferment it by itself. If we want to make rosés, like we make very good Syrah rosé, if we took the Syrah grape and fermented it into red wine, you've got this blue, inky, purplish intensity of this grape, because that's the nature of the color. When we make rosé, we take this grape and we put it into a press. And we allow the juice to stay in contact with that seed and skin for maybe 3 hours. Okay? It's dissolving a little bit of color. Then we press, and the juice that flows is this almost magenta-colored rosé that we separate from the seed and the skin now and make into rosé. So, white wine can be made with care out of any color of grape. Rosés, different colors, definitely from red grapes. And of course, red wines from red grapes. Okay? So, when we think about winemaking for guests, it's always good if you could add it, depending, if they're interested, what fermentation means, what the colors mean, how we achieve these colors, alcohol levels, sweetness levels. That's all part of fermentation. The concept of aging wine or not aging wine or aging wine in a barrel or leaving it in stainless steel is very important, and most people don't understand why we do what we do. you have to remember that everything in winemaking is a tool. A stainless steel tank is a tool. A barrel is a tool. And they have to be used in certain ways. When we talk about a aging wine, we talk about wine that we are encouraging a change. We want the wine to change. We want it to age. We want it to mature. We just want it to change somehow. Okay. When we talk about wines that we don't want to have aged, we're talking about we don't want wines to change. So how do we encourage a change and how do we discourage a change? All right. It all comes down to oxygen. And oxygen is the enemy of wine. If you leave a bottle open long enough, weeks or whatever, oxygen is going to change that wine. It oxidizes it. It wipes it out. So if you want to keep a wine fresh and prevent it from changing for a while, all wine's going to age somehow over time, but for a long time, you fill up a stainless steel tank to the brim. You have to keep airspace away from any vessel if you want to not oxidize your wine or keep it from changing. You fill up a stainless steel tank to the brim, keep it cool. The stainless steel tank, no oxygen can permeate into a stainless steel tank. It's impervious of oxygen. You keep oxygen away, you'll keep your wine from aging for a while. In a wooden barrel, the opposite thing happens. A wooden barrel is porous. And it doesn't matter what wood is used. You know, everything is an acquired taste. In Greece, they use pine wood. In Spain, they use a lot of cedar. In Italy, they still use casts out of chestnut wood. It's an acquired taste. But the reason that wood is used, regardless of the wood, is that it's porous. It breathes oxygen in small amounts. So when you look at a barrel, 60-gallon barrels, these are only lined with linseed oil, and these are porous. And they breathe air in very, very small amounts. And what does the air do? It changes things inside the wine. So for example, if you have a wine with a purple color which stains the floor and your teeth and everything else, over some time, that purple color is going to be a little more subdued, maybe more garnet. Okay? If you have a red wine with very high tannin, strong tannin, Cabernet Sauvignon, whatever, the aging, the oxygen softens the tannin of the wine. It matures it, it softens it. Okay? This is the mystery and the process of aging. It's time-honored. So, for aging wine, we do use oak because typically oak is the preferred wood that's compatible for good winemaking. We use oak, it's one species, but we use oak from many forests of the United States, like Minnesota, and the forests of Pennsylvania, and the forests of Arkansas, and Missouri. And we use oak from many forests of Europe. Okay? France, Spain, Italy, Hungary. And you think, well, why? If you think back about a grapevine, where it grows, the soil, the climate, it imparts a characteristic to that grapevine. We started our tour that way. Where the grape is planted has a flavor because of the soil where it grows and the climate it grows in. So we buy the oak from forests for the specific flavor that forest gives. Vanilla, slight nutmeg, slight sandalwood, whatever. Each forest imparts something. And the cooper that makes the barrels have their own techniques. Okay? Because a cooper is the person that cuts the oak, knows how to cut it, and then how to prepare it. Okay? They cut the wood and they leave it out in the elements for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years to leach to leach a lot of the bitterness and the astringencies and the tannins that wood has. So it's very interesting. So when one says, well, how do you know which of those oak barrels and the coopers works for your wine? Well, there's no formula, there's no recipe that's going to tell you that. You got to try it, and you try it carefully. And each vineyard in each area, like our Paso Robles vineyards, may require different forests of oak than some in Napa. It depends, again, the wine itself and what it's like. So what we do is that if we want to experiment, let's say we have Petit Syrah. This little vineyard we have, 200 barrels. Great, we're going to tuck it away this year and age it in 200 barrels of wood that we have selected. And it's been time honored, so we know what kind of forest to use. But a cooper comes and says, you know, I have the best wood in the world, and I make it in the best way. We buy one of his barrels, one, and we put it in with the 200. From that vineyard, we're going to know over the course of the year how our vineyard, that wine, reacts with his wood. We could be very surprised. But in the past, we've learned that sometimes there's disappointments. Things aren't compatible. So everything is a tool, and you have to experiment. Okay? So typically speaking, red wines are aged in wood. The more tannic the red wine has, the longer the aging. The less tannin, the softer. Pinot Noirs, we age 10 months in oak. That's it, elegant. And we use mainly French oak. More elegant for that type of wine. Cabernet Sauvignon, we age from 18 months to 24 months, depending on their Cabernet. Why? More tannin. We use certain American oak and certain French oak, because American oak is compatible, but we use a mix. Okay? Now we get to white wine. White wines are generally not aged anymore. We prevent them from aging because they really want the brightness from the fruit. Like when it's first fermented, it tastes and smells like that grape. You almost want that. So most white wines like Sauvignon Blanc and Riesling and Gewürztraminer, Moscatos, some Chardonnays are typically not aged. We prevent them from changing. There are exceptions. When we look at our St. Simeon Chardonnay, or call it Windstream. Windstream is probably our best Chardonnay from our vineyard in Santa Lucia Highland. It's a vineyard we call Sarmento. It's a very cold vineyard. Cold meaning windy and cool, but it just makes wines with great acidity and great structure. So what we do with that Chardonnay, because we know what we can do with that, we take that juice and we put it into special barrels, French oak, add yeast, and we ferment that Chardonnay in an oak barrel. Very unusual. It makes this rich, elegant style of wine. Our St. Simeon Chardonnay from different vineyards in Monterey with a portion of the Sarmento Santa Lucia. We ferment a portion of it in stainless steel to keep it bright and keep a portion in stainless steel, not aged. The other portion from those vineyards, we barrel ferment. So St. Simeon is kind of a blend of two worlds. Brightness, freshness, and a little bit of that, call it barrel fermentation, oak aged. So it's a nice, elegant, happy medium where the Windstream is rich and full. It's going to age forever. The St. Simeon is elegant and has this beautiful mouthfeel from the wood. And then we make other Chardonnays that aren't aged at all in wood. Brighter for consumers that like it that way. So a lot of these are driven by what we think the consumer may wish, price levels, and also what's best for that vineyard, for those vineyards, for those styles of wines. So nothing is a formula. You have to experiment and try and taste. It's where a winemaker comes in. They have to taste. Nothing's going to tell you that that's the right thing for that wine unless you try it and taste it, okay? One of the things I want to bring up about barrel aging versus stainless steel, the part about barrel aging that's really critical now is that, one, every time you put wine in a barrel, there's two things that happen. Number one, you begin to lose wine, evaporates. In a barrel, you could lose 4%, 5% a year in evaporation. You have to think about that. And we think about that when we begin aging wine. We already know certain things. The other part is that as you evaporate wine, one thing happens. The level of the wine decreases in that barrel. Small amount. But remember, the barrel is concave, so you will now develop an airspace, the horizontal length of that barrel. If you don't check that wine and come back 6 months later, we'll say, you are going to have an airspace. Think about leaving a bottle open of wine for a long time and seeing what happens, what oxygen can do to wine. Detrimental rather than helping it. Okay? So, when we look at barrel aging of wine, we have to think that, one, we know we're losing wine. Two, we know there's that loss has to be added back all the time. 2 people every month go around with a cart with a stainless steel container of that same wine in these 100 barrels from that vineyard of that year. They go and they add back the wine that's lost that month. Think about that. But not only just the cost involved, but how you have to babysit wine. Think about every barrel as its own little tank. Think about a 6,000-gallon tank. The wine's filled to the brim, it's there. No airspace, no problem. When you want a sample, you take a sample. Well, you analyze the sample. It's 6,000 gallons worth of the same sample. It's done. Right? Think about taking the 6,000 gallons, and now we want to barrel age that wine. You put it into 100 barrels. Different forests, same species of oak, different forests. You have 600 tanks to take samples of. 100 tanks, to take samples of. Why? Because you now are dealing with a little vessel and each one reacts differently. You have to take a sample of each one of those barrels when you analyze. So, aging wine is babysitting and taking a lot of care. I think the fallacy with many consumers today is that they think that barrel aging of wine or aging of wine is the best thing for wine. And I say to you that it's not. It doesn't mean that. You have to look at the wine you have and see if it'll improve. Your answer is very simple. Will the wine improve? Will it benefit by barrel aging? Or will it not? If it doesn't, then why do it? Just because on a label it says we barrel aged wine? We barrel age wine that we know is going to improve. So we know that within our portfolio, we have chosen certain good red wines, we'll say, certain good whites, that we know are going to improve and justify the cost of barrel aging. The loss, the time, and the cost of the barrel. A barrel today is anywhere from $400 to $1,000 a barrel. Okay? We have 3,500 of them. Every year, we sell off 20% of the barrels of the oldest years, and add 20% brand new. So to give you an idea, if we were to get this Petite Syrah vineyard again this year, and we make it same style every year, what is our composition of barrels? Okay. It's all oak. We know we have some American oak, some French. But 20% of that vintage that goes in the barrel this year, 20% is brand new oak that's never been used. 20% is oak that's been used 1 year, the prior year. 20% 2 years. 20% 3 years, 20% 4 years. Why? The older the barrels, the more neutral the wood. The wine ages nicely without picking up a lot of strong oak flavors. The newest wood, you may think, is the best wood. Well, it has your most powerful flavors, but too much new oak, it's going to cover up the taste of the wine. You have to be very careful. And again, we experiment with we know which wines can take that kind of thing and not. So in our portfolio, we generally have percentages of new, percentages of old. Every year we sell off barrels that have been used 5 years, 6 years. We sell them off. Okay, they go for other wineries that are looking, they're just starting, they need older wood. That's real sanitary because they have plenty of new barrels. They want something a little older, neutral. We sell them for, new distilleries that are starting up that want good barrels for aging brandies and whiskeys and things like that. But I'll never recoup the money on the barrel. So when you talk about barrel aging, we go back. Why do we age wine? We want it to change or prevent it from changing. Stainless steel, oak barrels, they're a tool. There are many wines that we would never age. There are many red wines we would never age. They're not going to improve. They are really good the way they are. We leave them in stainless steel. Okay? So that's something about aging in general, and I think which sometimes need to be conveyed. The wood, where the oak trees are grown impart flavor, the multiple forests in the United States and Europe that we use. All these things are part of these tools to help make a better product of our different wines. One thing I failed to mention about barrels, and it's a question that really comes up on the tours a lot, that the customer guests usually say, well, if you have 200 barrels of Petit Syrah, do you bottle each one individually? You know, in today's world, there's this thing about bottling bourbon, what they call single barrel, straight, single cask. With wine, we don't do that because each wine is a little variable in the barrel. So what we do, we take the 200 barrels, again, of this Petit Syrah vineyard, 2 years later, ready to bottle, and we lay them out. And those are analyzed organoleptically, meaning smell and taste each wine. And if everything works out, then all of those are in a composite. They are drawn out of the barrels and put in a tank so it's uniform. So the blend is made for the year. Because if you start taking a barrel here and a barrel there and try to bottle it, it's too variable. So we make a homogeneous blend after we believe that this is the blend we want to make for this year. And all that is done by taste and smell, and nothing from a textbook, nothing by a formula, maybe experience with that vineyard over time, but all that, okay? One of the things that I think we have to be careful about as guides is that you don't want to speak too much about the wrong things to a consumer because, not everyone wants technical information. I mean, I'm saying these things to you because they're things to use. They're important things to use. But you have to be so careful of your group. Some are very happy to learn about the history and why we're here and some little twists about the things we do. But then you have the tool of some technical information to use for people that are more interested in wine. And I find more than ever now that there are some that want this technical information. If you have a group and there's an answer that you can't answer, it's better to be honest. It's better to say, I really don't know that answer. I have a feeling or I don't know, but I'll get you the answer later if you'll come with me. We will get you that answer. That is the important thing to say, rather than trying to say something that's not true for the sake of making an impression. You don't want to do that. It's not a good thing. So in our tours, information to use depending on the tours, not boring people, but having the information there when you need it for the different groups. Almost the last part of the tour should be in the bottling area, okay? And we do bottle Monday through Thursday, 10-hour days, or we bottle Monday through Thursday. And then we do not bottle Fridays, Saturday, and Sundays. So if it's a weekday tour, most people can see the tour taking place, the bottling taking place. We bottle from about 7:30. Hi, Steve. We bottle about 7:30 to about 5 o'clock in the evening, Monday through Thursday. What's interesting about in here, this is kind of the last step, and bottling. And I love this room because they're able to see the magnitude of barrels. They're able to see stainless steel tanks on the side here. They're able to see the bottling line. But to think that we have babysat wine for over 2.5 years, and now you could ruin it by the way you bottle it. We've taken care of wine for 2 years, 2.5 years, whatever, and wine can be ruined in the way that it's bottled. And I say that because if you think about it this way, number one, wine, when we move wine from one vessel to another, like a barrel to a tank to make a blend, or the tank into the filling machines, we push it with nitrogen gas. We relatively do not pump it, we push it. The nitrogen gas is very gentle. It prevents oxygen. It keeps the oxygen away from the wine. You want to keep air away from wine when you bottle the wine. Secondly, here you have an empty bottle. That empty bottle is full of oxygen. The bottle is fed into the bottling lines, and they're inverted. They're vacuumed out. They're sparged with nitrogen gas to eliminate oxygen. You never want to take that bottle and fill it because you have air in that bottle. And if you put a cork or a cap, that wine has touched oxygen. So what we do, we take a bottle, we sparge it with nitrogen, and it goes through the filling machines. The filling machines have tubes, filling tubes, that go all the way to the bottom of that bottle inside and fill, flowing upwards gently at 100 bottles a minute, but still gently. Nitrogen is above the fill of the wine. The wine touches nitrogen. The nitrogen prevents oxygen from touching the wine. That's just one precaution. As it goes inside, it goes to the capper or the corker, and even there, that little bit of space, airspace, is sucked out. Nitrogen, put the cork or the cap. The most important thing is all bottling takes place, all the filling, closures take place in that sanitary room. We never want yeast, dust, bacteria to touch that wine. It's bottled in a safe environment. You would never, imaginably, bottle a bottle of wine out here because you don't know what's in the air. You simply do not know what is in that air, what kind of bacteria, yeast that could happen. And once it's bottled with a cork and the cap, it's sealed, it's trapped. It's going to do something. So all the filling closures in a sanitary room, out here, machines to put the capsules, the labels, kind of the cosmetics of it all is all done here. So today we've spoken a little bit about winemaking, a little bit about barrel aging, a little bit about bottling. You could show customers the warehouses, which are all this way, shipping. Either there you make the statement, or many customers ask, how much wine do you make? I mean, I guess it's human nature to say, hey, what's your volume and this and that. A lot of the things we do, and we need to make sure of this, a lot of these things are private. It's a privately held company, it's personal. You never want to speak about volumes and what you do for other customers. People say, do you bottle wine for other people? Yes, in our total business, we do. But never state the customer or what you do or for what reason. That's our client's business, not ours to say. But going back to our own wines, I guess I always like to say that we make wines of different volume levels because we have always catered to customers at different price levels. Okay. So we as a company are set up, and as a winery, we're able to make, I'm going to say, 20,000 cases of Madalena Chardonnay at a great price. And we're able to make 800 cases of our Windstream Chardonnay, which is our artisan. So we're able to make different quantities, volumes, and within the company, the winemaking, make wines that are of smaller artisan series. We're able to make this. We're able to make wines that, believe it or not, people can still buy at $6.95 a bottle. We're able to make specialty wines, special occasion wines, like our Napa Cabernet at $50 a bottle. And one says, why do you want this range? We want the range because we never forget where we came from. Where we came from was never Napa Valley Cabernet 60 years ago, nor was any other winery that. What we made were wines that were reasonably priced for customers. So today we make really a large amount of wines from $6.95 to $10 a bottle. We make Madalenas at $15 a bottle. We make St. Simeons in the $20 range. Today's world, if one were to start a winery today, and go through the permitting process, the building of a facility, what it costs, either purchase grapes or plant vineyards, from the time that they from the time that they are ready to crush their first grape, they probably won't be selling a bottle of wine for 2 to 3 years. And there's no way in today's world that they're going to put out, anyone would put out wines for less than $40, $50 a bottle, given the conditions today and what things cost. So as a company, we have a lot of things under our belt. There's a lot of things paid for. There's a lot of advantages we have. And we still welcome that range of wine for that customer. And that's what we do. It's the range, which I think has made us so successful as a company. We kind of never forgot a customer's need. A wine they could drink every day, a wine for a special occasion. We kind of have that range. So in going back, we never want to mention volume. It's kind of a proprietary thing. People will ask, where can we buy your wines? You know, most of our wines are sold in restaurants. We sell some in package stores, some in supermarkets, most of it here. But the problem we and other wineries have faced today is that, you know, if you go to a supermarket today and you look at the hundreds of wines that are on the shelves, huge varieties, great. But when you think about it, those 100 varieties, I bet you in today's world, 3 wineries probably control 100 of those brands. And you would never know that. Is that good or bad? No, it's business. But so many wineries today, the wineries that you see are under the umbrella of some very large company. That's fine. That's business. But what it means is, for a lot of people like ourselves, it's very hard sometimes to get the placement. Remember, there's 1,300 wineries in California today. Everyone would like a placement or 2. Well, what's left of those 100 brands that are taken, there's another 150 spots. Who's the lucky ones? Sometimes we are. We have a spot. So most of our wine we do sell in package stores. We do sell in supermarkets, certain things. Not so much the low production wines, because we only have so little of those. We try to sell them here in our own tasting room. But we do sell in different states, and we've been experiencing some very good business in China and Korea and Japan and areas like this, where wine was never typically part of a culture, but now it is. Okay? And that's kind of become our biggest export business. So we sell wine in different areas in different ways, and that's what we do. I think at the very end of the tour, it's always a good thing just to thank the guests for coming in, for mentioning that, you know, we do give tours 7 days a week, to welcome their friends. I think it's important to, again, let people know who you are and give them business cards, and if they ever need anything, or they're bringing special guests, families, whatever, out of state to visit, to call you, to email you. This is the bond that we are trying to create between our staff and the customer, and a tour guide and a customer. It has to be personal, and they have to know you care. And that is what we are going to be looking for in all our tours. I think at the end of the tour would be an opportunity to mention things. Many guests are looking for different wine classes, some just to learn about wine, or some different events we have. We have flyers at the different tour areas, like in the bottling room, which if people are interested, you give it to them. It shows the classes, upcoming classes and events. I think it's good to pick a few wines if the guests have not tasted anything, is to say, well, I'd like to recommend that if you'd like to, for those of you that like some very, very good red wines, today we have this particular red wine open. Saint Simeon Cabernet. It's something from Paso Robles, and just you should taste that. For those that like good white wines, maybe in a dry wine, I recommend Saint Simeon Chardonnay if that's open, or another white. For those that like wines on that little sweeter edge, I'd recommend maybe a Maddalena Muscat Canelli or one of the Stella Rosa wines, just to discuss these kind of things. It's an opportunity to guide people to taste something if they haven't had it. And in the winter months, one of the things that we've always recommended is that at the very end to say, and if you want a really great wine for the winter, I recommend a little bit of our La Quinta Syrah port. 20% alcohol, very rich, great wintertime wine. Okay, very soothing, very kind of warming kind of wine, just to try that. So it's a very good tool for you to recommend wine, recommend events for the customer. I mentioned at the very beginning, and what you need to say at the very end is, folks, this is the end of the tour. I'd like you to follow me because I'm going to guide you back to the tasting room, and if you please follow me together. And then as they come out, you might want to keep the guests here while you shut the door and then go out. You do not want to run out at a fast pace and leave straggling people behind you like a herd of cattle. That is not what you are doing, okay? It's not what you want. You want to take care of your guests from the beginning to the end, and back to that tasting room, and make them feel a part of you. That's it.